Human existence is typically described as a hazy, abstract spiritual gradient. That model is incomplete. At a mechanical level, existence functions as a strict, finite information processing stack, governed by absolute boundaries and limited bandwidth. The absolute endpoints, the mind generates subjective intent at the top, while the universe generates absolute physical circumstance at the bottom. Between them, the soul operates as a holding space and software interface, while the body acts as a physical repository recording biological references. This comparative chart maps these modern engineering terms directly to classical Hermetic models. Ancient philosophers categorized these exact boundaries as Nous, Psyche, Soma, and Hyle, recognizing thousands of years ago that the physical world does not generate ideas, it simply receives and reflects them. Because these layers interact through a physical universe governed by thermodynamic inertia, they possess strict processing limits. Pushing too much data through the stack forces a bottleneck, mathematically choking a human's capacity to perceive reality. This formula represents the complete metaphysical circuit, mapping the precise direction of information transfer across every boundary. The absolute law of this architecture is skip-level routing is impossible. The mind cannot directly manipulate the physical universe, nor can the universe directly imprint onto the mind. Information transfers sequentially through two streams. Understanding, U, flows inward from the universe, up through the body and soul, to the mind. Will, W, flows outward, translating intent downward from the mind through physiological layers to enact mechanical change upon the universe. Every sudden realization and every physical action you execute is simply a surviving packet of data that successfully navigated this bidirectional pipeline. Information transfer through the stack is not instantaneous. Each layer possesses a specific processing capacity, represented by the variable S. This dictates the contextual rate of time a layer requires to process incoming data. The inward cascade initiates when the universe bombards the physical threshold of the human biological system with a continuous, infinite stream of objective data. This diagram shows how the body manages that overwhelming volume. Operating under strict linear biological limits, the body has a highly restricted processing capacity. It must aggressively downsample infinite universal data into a narrow, finite spectrum of sensory inputs. The surviving physical references are uploaded into the soul's holding space. Here, the interface converts physiological pain, temperature, or sound into abstract data points. Finally, the mind utilizes its exceptionally fast processing rate to pull those organized points from the interface, crystallizing the raw data into a fully formed subjective realization. Human perception is mathematically restricted by this downsampling sequence. We only experience the tiny fraction of absolute reality that our hardware is capable of rendering. The outward cascade reverses this entire sequence. It begins at the top, with the mind generating a high-speed conceptual burst of intent. Here we see that the boundary between any two layers acts as a refractive lens. Because the downward intent hits a slower time rate capacity in the layer below, the frequency of the information forcibly changes. During this translation phase, the soul takes the mind's rapid abstraction and compiles it into discrete physiological instructions that the slower, linear nervous system can accept. The body then receives these compiled instructions and acts upon them, attempting to enact mechanical commands onto the physical universe. The universe meets this attempt with immense physical inertia and an unyielding processing rate. It naturally and passively resists the change. Human agency is entirely a process of friction. Your intent is constantly choked by the thermodynamic resistance of moving a concept through denser and denser layers of reality. This equation visualizes a complete architectural failure. When a receiving layer offers absolute resistance, its capacity to accept incoming data drops to zero. The untranslated intent is not destroyed. Instead, the boundary forces a division by zero, which must resolve through a mechanical cost. The failed translation acquires a +1 mathematical penalty. This variable represents accumulated ontological friction. We see this outward failure when the body attempts to force its will upon a completely immovable universal obstacle. The command cannot translate into physical change. That generated energy reflects backward into the stack, lodging itself in the biological hardware as acute physical exhaustion. On the inward cascade, if the soul refuses to accept an uncomfortable truth uploaded from the body, the data packet fails to translate. It remains trapped at the boundary as unprocessed sensory debt. Persistent psychological tension and biological burnout are not metaphors. They are literal mathematical remnants of dividing by zero within your metaphysical stack. Willpower is not a mystical force. Mechanically, it is a dense, high-frequency stream of information flowing downward from the mind. This cross-section illustrates the primary architectural constraint of the human system. The soul is a holding space with a fixed volume, responsible for managing bidirectional traffic simultaneously. Overthinking occurs when the mind floods this finite pipe with an overwhelming volume of downward commands. To prevent total failure, the soul must reallocate nearly all of its internal time rate just to compile and push this massive downward flow into the nervous system. By allocating maximum capacity to outward will, the system leaves mathematically zero processing space for incoming sensory data. Intense cognitive focus and anxiety actively throttle your connection to reality. They function as a localized denial-of-service attack, consuming the exact bandwidth required to perceive your environment. We routinely celebrate individuals pushing through extreme exhaustion or catastrophic injury as a triumph of mind over matter. In objective reality, the biological hardware is still sustaining severe structural damage, and the universe continues to log that physical pain. The disconnect happens in the intermediary layer. Because the soul's bandwidth is completely saturated by the outward push of will, it simply stops reading the body's upward data stream. The warnings are sent, but they are not processed. Inside this feedback loop, the mind experiences a profound sense of isolation and triumph. It perceives a state of invincibility precisely because it is totally disconnected from the physical inputs of the body. Mind over matter is not the conquest of physical reality. It is a highly dangerous, temporary illusion generated by intentionally starving the stack of objective data. To strip the mystical connotations away entirely, meditation is a mechanical process of precise clock synchronization and bandwidth clearance. We define this operational baseline as the void state. Looking again at the stack, the foundational act of entering the void state requires the mind to intentionally halt the generation of outward will. Halting that downward transmission completely collapses the entire execution sequence. The soul stops compiling physical commands, instantly freeing up the totality of its holding space. With its processing capacity fully restored, the upward flow of understanding rushes back in. The system clears its backlog of sensory debt, processing physical realities that were previously blocked by intent. True synchronization with reality demands clearing the bottleneck. You must deliberately starve the ego's outward output in order to restore the thermodynamic flow of the complete metaphysical stack.